The billionaire's hands trembled as he stared at his phone screen, his dark eyes widening in complete disbelief. The credit card notification showed a purchase that made absolutely no sense. $27,000 spent at a small medical clinic in Lagos, Nigeria. But it wasn't the amount that shocked Kwame Asante to his core. It was what his housemaid Amara had bought with his money. "This can't be real," he whispered to himself in his penthouse overlooking Atlanta's skyline. The purchase receipt glowed on his phone. Emergency surgery fund patient. Mercy Okafor, age 7. His heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity. You see, Mercy Okafor was a name that haunted Kwame's dreams every single night for the past 15 years. A name he thought he'd never see again. A name connected to the darkest secret of his past. A secret that could destroy everything he'd built. But how could his quiet housemaid Amara possibly know about Mercy? How could she know about the little girl Kwame had been forced to abandon in Nigeria when he fled to America with nothing but broken promises and crushing guilt? The phone buzzed again. Another notification. This time it was a photo sent from Amara's number. The image showed a small African girl lying in a hospital bed, her tiny face peaceful but pale. She had Kwame's distinctive dimpled chin and the same unusual hazel eyes that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. His daughter. The daughter he thought had died years ago. The phone slipped from Kwame's shaking hands and crashed onto the marble floor of his study. 15 years of running from his past, 15 years of building a billion-dollar empire to forget the family he'd left behind, and now his carefully constructed world was crumbling because of a credit card purchase made by a woman he'd hired just 6 months ago. But this story doesn't begin with that shocking moment. To understand how a simple act of kindness from a housemaid could bring a powerful man to his knees, we need to go back to where it all started. 6 months earlier, Kwame Asante stood in his lavish Atlanta mansion, interviewing 3 women for the position of head housemaid. At 42, he was one of the youngest black billionaires in America, having built his fortune through a revolutionary fintech company that connected African immigrants with American financial services. His success story graced magazine covers, but the man behind the smile carried wounds that money couldn't heal. "I need someone I can trust completely," Kwame explained to the 3 candidates sitting in his living room. "This position requires handling sensitive information, managing household expenses, and maintaining absolute discretion." The first candidate was Keisha Johnson, a sharp-dressed woman from Detroit with impressive credentials. She'd worked for several high-profile families and spoke with the confidence of someone who knew her worth. "Mr. Asante," Keisha said, adjusting her pearls, "I've managed households worth more than most people see in a lifetime. Your privacy and security would be my top priority." The second candidate was Maria Santos, a middle-aged Latina woman with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years of honest work. She sat quietly, her resume showing a decade of service to one family before they relocated overseas. "I believe in treating every home like it's my own," Maria said softly when asked about her philosophy. "Your house would be more than just a job to me, Mr. Asante. It would be a place I'd protect and care for." The third candidate was different from the others. Amara Okafor was a young Nigerian woman, probably in her late 20s, with an understated elegance that immediately caught Kwame's attention. Her resume was shorter than the others, but something about her presence filled the room with a strange familiarity. "Miss Okafor," Kwame said, noting her surname with a slight frown. It was common enough in Nigeria, but it stirred something uncomfortable in his memory. "Tell me why you want this position." Amara looked directly into his eyes with an intensity that made him shift in his seat. "Sometimes, Mr. Asante, we're placed exactly where we need to be to heal old wounds. I believe in destiny, and I believe this house needs someone who understands the weight of carrying secrets." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Kwame felt his chest tighten. How could she possibly know about the secrets that kept him awake at night? "What kind of secrets?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The kind that follow a man across oceans," Amara replied. "The kind that make a person build walls so high that they forget there are doors." Keisha and Maria exchanged confused glances, but Kwame couldn't look away from Amara. There was something about her that felt like coming home and facing judgment at the same time. That evening, after the other candidates left, Kwame made his decision. He hired Amara Okafor, not because her qualifications were the strongest, but because something deep in his soul told him she was supposed to be there. What he didn't know was that Amara had been searching for him for over 10 years. What he couldn't have imagined was that the woman now holding his house keys also held the key to his past. A past that included a promise he'd broken and a child he'd abandoned. Amara moved through Kwame's mansion like she belonged there, and within weeks, the house felt more like a home than it had in years. She had an unusual way of anticipating his needs before he voiced them. His morning coffee was always perfect. His clothes were pressed exactly how he liked them, and somehow she managed to have his favorite Nigerian dishes ready whenever he was feeling homesick. Amara, Kwame said one evening as she served him jollof rice that tasted exactly like his grandmother used to make. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother taught me," she replied simply. "She always said that food is how we show love when words aren't enough." Something in her voice made him look up from his plate. There was a sadness in her eyes that he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. "Do you miss her?" he asked. "Every day," Amara said. "But I learned that missing someone doesn't mean you stop living. It means you live better to honor what they gave you." Kwame nodded, feeling an unexpected comfort in her presence. For the first time in years, dinner didn't feel like a lonely ritual. As weeks turned into months, Kwame began to rely on Amara for more than household tasks. She became his confidant, the person he found himself talking to about business problems and personal struggles. She listened without judgment and offered advice that was always surprisingly insightful. "You know," Kwame said one night as they sat in his study, "I never asked what brought you to America." Amara was dusting his bookshelf, but her hands stilled on a photo of him receiving a business award. "Sometimes we have to travel far to fix what's broken close to home," she said. "That sounds like there's a story behind it." "There always is," she replied, but she didn't elaborate. What Kwame didn't notice was how Amara's eyes lingered on certain photos around his house, particularly the ones from his early years in America, when his face still carried the guilt and fear of a young man running from something terrible. What he didn't see was how she sometimes stood in his study late at night, staring at his computer screen where he kept financial records and business contacts. She wasn't snooping for personal gain. She was searching for traces of the life he'd left behind in Nigeria. What he couldn't have known was that every night, after he went to bed, Amara made phone calls to Lagos in a language he would have recognized if he'd overheard them. She spoke in urgent whispers about medical bills and treatment options, about time running out and promises that needed to be kept. The other thing Kwame missed was the gradual change in Amara's behavior as the months passed. She became more protective of him, more invested in his well-being. She started leaving little notes with his morning coffee, inspirational quotes about forgiveness and second chances. She began preparing meals that were specifically designed to comfort someone carrying emotional pain. It was as if she was preparing him for something, or preparing herself. One evening in late spring, Kwame made a decision that would change everything. He was preparing for a business trip to New York, and as usual, Amara was helping him pack. "I want you to have this," he said, pulling out 3 credit cards and placing them on the bed. "One for household expenses, one for emergencies, and one for anything personal you might need." Amara stared at the cards like they were weapons. "Mr. Asante, I can't accept these. It's too much trust." "Trust is earned," Kwame replied, "and you've earned mine completely." What he meant as a gesture of appreciation would soon become the key that unlocked 15 years of buried secrets and changed both their lives forever. The morning Kwame left for New York, Amara stood at the window watching his car disappear down the long driveway. In her hand, she held the 3 credit cards he'd given her, but her mind was thousands of miles away in a small hospital room in Lagos, Nigeria. Her phone buzzed with a message that made her blood run cold. "Mercy's condition is worsening. The doctors say she needs surgery within 48 hours, or we'll lose her. We need $27,000 immediately." Amara sank into Kwame's favorite chair, the weight of 10 years of searching and planning pressing down on her shoulders. She'd found him, the man who'd promised her sister he'd come back for his daughter. The man who'd fled Nigeria with pledges of marriage and family that turned to dust the moment his plane took off. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. This wasn't about the letters her dying sister had written to an address that no longer existed, or the photos of a father that 7-year-old Mercy carried everywhere she went. This was about a little girl who was fighting for her life while her father built empires in a country that had forgotten her existence. Amara picked up her phone and dialed the number she'd memorized years ago. "Dr. Adebayo," she said when the call connected. "It's Amara Okafor. I have the money for Mercy's surgery." "Thank God." The doctor's voice crackled through the international connection. "But Amara, $27,000. Where did you find such money?" Amara looked at the credit cards in her hand. "Sometimes the universe provides what we need exactly when we need it." 3 hours later, she sat in Kwame's study with her laptop open, staring at the payment screen for Lagos General Hospital. Her finger hovered over the submit button that would transfer $27,000 from Kwame Asante's account to save the life of his daughter, a daughter he didn't even know was still alive. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who'd abandoned his family was about to save them without even knowing it. She clicked submit. But what Amara didn't anticipate was how quickly Kwame would see the transaction. What she hadn't planned for was the photo the hospital would send her showing Mercy before the surgery. A photo that clearly showed the little girl's distinctive features that mirrored her father's face. What she couldn't have predicted was that in her rush to save a life, she'd revealed a secret that would shake Kwame's world to its foundation. Now, as Kwame sat in his New York hotel room staring at that hospital photo, Amara was about to receive a phone call that would change everything. What would you do if you discovered that your employee had been hiding a connection to your past for months? And how would you react if that same person had just used your money to save a life you didn't know still existed? Let me know in the comments what you think Kwame should do next. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories like this one. Kwame's hands shook as he dialed Amara's number from his New York hotel room. It was past midnight, but sleep was impossible. The photo of the little girl, his daughter, was burned into his memory. "Hello, Mr. Asante." Amara's voice was calm, as if she'd been expecting this call. "Who is she?" Kwame's voice cracked with 15 years of suppressed emotion. There was a long pause before Amara answered. "Her name is Mercy Okafor. She's 7 years old. She loves to draw pictures of butterflies and she asks about her father every single day." "How is that possible?" Kwame whispered. "I was told. They told me the baby died. The complications during birth, the bleeding. I was told both mother and child died." "You were lied to," Amara said quietly. "My sister Adunni survived long enough to give birth to your daughter. She lived for 3 more years, waiting for you to come back like you promised. She died believing you would return." The hotel room spun around Kwame as the truth hit him like a physical blow. "Your sister? Adunni was your sister. My older sister. The woman you loved. The woman you promised to marry when you got established in America. The woman who waited for letters that never came, for phone calls that stopped, for a man who disappeared like smoke." Kwame remembered Adunni Okafor with crystal clarity now. Her beautiful smile, her dreams of America, her complete trust in his promises. He'd been young and desperate then, fleeing Nigeria with nothing but ambition and a scholarship to study business in Atlanta. He genuinely intended to return for her, to bring her to America, to build the life they'd planned together. But America had changed him. Success had come quickly, and with it, a new identity. The struggling young immigrant who'd loved Adunni felt like a different person entirely. The letters became harder to write, then stopped altogether. When he'd finally worked up the courage to call Nigeria, he'd been told that Adunni and the baby had died in childbirth. "I tried to come back," Kwame said, though the words felt hollow. "When I heard about the deaths, I was destroyed. I threw myself into work because the pain was unbearable." "The pain of guilt or the pain of loss?" Amara asked, her voice sharp for the first time since he'd known her. "Both," Kwame admitted. "I was a coward. I was young and scared, and I convinced myself that providing from America was better than struggling together in Nigeria. I was going to send for her when I got established, but then Then you got comfortable with forgetting. The silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of mistakes and misunderstandings. How long have you known? Kwame asked. That you were Mercy's father? I've known since she was born. That you were still alive and successful in America? I found out 5 years ago when your story appeared in an international business magazine. That you lived in Atlanta? I've been searching for this address for 2 years. And you came here to… What? To punish me? I came here to see what kind of man you'd become, Amara said. To see if you deserved to know you had a daughter who was dying slowly without the medical care she needed. Dying? The word hit Kwame like ice water. She has a heart condition that's been getting worse since she was 5. The doctors in Lagos said she needed surgery that would cost more money than our entire village sees in a year. I've been working and saving for 2 years, but it wasn't enough. Time was running out. So you took a job in my house. I took a job in your house to see if the man who abandoned his family was worth saving a child for. I needed to know if you were still the person my sister fell in love with, or if you'd become someone who only cared about money and success. Kwame closed his eyes, understanding dawning on him. And what did you decide? I decided that you never stopped loving her, Amara said softly. I see how you look at photos of Nigeria. I see how you cook Aduni's favorite foods when you're sad. I see how you keep her favorite flowers in your garden, even though you pretend you don't know why you plant them. Kwame's throat tightened. He did keep purple hibiscus in his garden, and he'd never consciously acknowledged why. You used my credit card to save her life, he said. I used your credit card to give your daughter a chance to meet her father. Will she be okay? The surgery was successful. Dr. Adebayo says she'll need time to recover, but she should be fine. For the first time in 15 years, Kwame Asante cried. Not the controlled emotions of a businessman, but the raw, broken sobs of a father who'd almost lost a daughter he didn't know existed. But this was only the beginning of a revelation that would change everything he thought he knew about his past and his future. The flight from New York to Lagos was the longest 22 hours of Kwame's life. He'd caught the first available flight after his conversation with Amara, leaving his business meetings and obligations behind without a second thought. For the first time in his adult life, something was more important than his empire. Amara had flown back to Lagos 2 days earlier, using one of his credit cards to book her flight. She'd left a letter on his pillow, an explanation he wasn't sure he was ready to read but couldn't stop himself from opening. Mr. Asante, the letter began. By the time you read this, I'll be on my way to prepare Mercy for the possibility that her father might finally come home. I need you to understand that this little girl has never stopped believing in fairy tales. She has never stopped believing that her daddy is a good man who got lost but would find his way back to her. I didn't plan to care about you when I took this job. I planned to hate you, to expose you, maybe even to destroy some of what you'd built while she suffered. But watching you these past months, I saw glimpses of the man my sister fell in love with. You're still in there under all that success and guilt. Mercy doesn't know you're coming. I couldn't risk breaking her heart again if you changed your mind. But if you get on that plane, if you make this journey, you need to be prepared to stay. She's had enough people disappear from her life. The letter was signed simply, Amara. Now, as Kwame's plane descended into Lagos Airport, his stomach churned with anticipation and terror. He'd built billion-dollar deals, spoken to world leaders, commanded boardrooms full of powerful people. But the thought of meeting his 7-year-old daughter terrified him more than any business challenge he'd ever faced. The Lagos he returned to was different from the one he'd left 15 years ago. Skyscrapers reached toward the sky, highways carried modern cars, and the airport buzzed with international commerce. But the smell, that distinctive mix of ocean air, spices, and red earth, transported him instantly back to his youth. Amara was waiting for him at arrivals, and seeing her in Nigeria, surrounded by the homeland they shared, he understood something that had nagged at him for months. She'd always seemed familiar not just because of her resemblance to Aduni, but because she carried herself with the same quiet strength that had first attracted him to her sister. "How is she?" were his first words. "Recovering well," Amara replied. The doctors are amazed by her progress. But Kwame, I need to prepare you. She doesn't know you're her father yet. What does she know? She knows that a kind man in America helped pay for her surgery. She knows that this man might come to visit her. I told her he was someone who cared very much about making sure little girls in Nigeria got the help they needed. They drove through Lagos traffic in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Kwame stared out the window at street scenes that stirred memories he'd buried for years. Children playing football in dusty lots, women carrying goods on their heads, men gathering under trees to discuss politics and business. This was the world he'd left behind in his rush to become someone else. She's staying with our aunt while she recovers, Amara explained as they pulled up to a modest but well-maintained compound. Aunt Kemi raised us after our parents died. She's been Mercy's grandmother in every way that matters. The compound was exactly the kind of place Kwame had grown up in, concrete walls painted in cheerful colors, a small garden with practical plants like pepper and tomatoes, plastic chairs arranged for conversation and community. It was a world away from his Atlanta mansion, but it felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived since leaving Nigeria. A woman who was clearly Amara's aunt emerged from the house. She was in her 50s, with graying hair and eyes that held both warmth and judgment. "So," Aunt Kemi said, looking Kwame up and down, "you're the man who forgot he had a family." "Yes, ma'am," Kwame replied, knowing that any excuse would sound hollow. "And now you remember? Now I know the truth." Aunt Kemi studied his face for a long moment, then nodded toward the house. "She's in the back room drawing. She draws pictures of America sometimes, trying to imagine what her father's life looks like." Kwame's heart clenched. May I see her?" "You can see her," Aunt Kemi said. "But remember, she's been through surgery, she's still weak, and she's just a child. Whatever happens between you and your past, don't make promises to that little girl unless you intend to keep them." As they walked toward the back of the house, Kwame could hear soft humming, a child's voice singing a melody he recognized as one of Adunni's favorites. His steps slowed as they approached the open doorway. What he saw when he looked into that room would either heal his heart or break it completely. 7-year-old Mercy Okafor sat cross-legged on a colorful mat, completely absorbed in her drawing. Her dark hair was pulled back in neat braids decorated with small beads that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. She wore a simple yellow dress that made her skin glow, and despite the recent surgery, her movements were animated and full of life. What stopped Kwame cold wasn't just how much she looked like him, though the resemblance was unmistakable. It was the picture she was drawing. With careful, deliberate strokes of her colored pencils, she'd created a scene of a big house with many windows, a man in a business suit standing in front of it, and a little girl holding his hand. "That's a beautiful drawing," Kwame said softly from the doorway. Mercy looked up, and the moment their eyes met, the world shifted. Her hazel eyes, exactly like his own, widened with curiosity rather than fear. "Thank you," she said politely. "Aunt Amara told me that a nice man from America helped me get better. Are you him?" Kwame glanced at Amara, who nodded encouragingly. He stepped into the room and knelt down to Mercy's level. "Yes, I'm very happy I could help. How are you feeling?" "Much better. The doctor said my heart is strong now. Would you like to see my other drawings?" For the next hour, Mercy showed Kwame dozens of pictures she'd created over the years. There were drawings of butterflies and flowers, of Lagos street scenes and imaginary castles. But many of them featured the same recurring theme: a little girl and a man she always identified as my daddy in America. "Tell me about your daddy," Kwame said, his voice carefully neutral. Mercy's face lit up. "He's very important and very busy, but Mama always said he loves me very much. She said he had to go far away to build something special, but one day he would come back for us. Aunt Amara says he's probably taking care of other children who need help, like how he helped me." Each innocent word pierced Kwame's heart. This child had built an entire mythology around his absence, turning abandonment into heroism, neglect into noble sacrifice. "What if," Kwame said carefully, "your daddy wasn't as good as you think? What if he made mistakes? Mercy considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to important questions. Aunt Kemi says everyone makes mistakes. She says what matters is if you try to fix them when you learn better. You're a very smart girl. Mama used to say I got my smart from my daddy and my heart from her. Mercy paused in her coloring. I wish I could give him one of my pictures. Do you think someone in America would give it to him? Kwame's throat tightened. I think he would treasure any picture you made for him. That evening, after Mercy had fallen asleep, Kwame sat with Amara and Aunt Kemi in the small living room. The weight of the day's revelations pressed down on him like a physical burden. She's perfect, he said quietly. She's also fragile, Aunt Kemi replied. That heart surgery fixed the physical problem. But this child has been waiting her entire life for a father who exists mostly in her imagination. You need to decide right now what role you're going to play in her future. I want to be her father. I want to take care of her, provide for her, be part of her life. From Atlanta? Aunt Kemi's voice was skeptical. I could move back to Nigeria. I could set up operations here, split my time. You could, Amara interrupted. But should you? Your life is in America now. Your business, your obligations, your identity. They're all tied to a world that's very different from this one. Kwame looked around the simple room where 3 generations of this family had made their home. Everything was clean and well-maintained, but it was clear that money was tight. The furniture was old but cared for, the decorations were handmade rather than store-bought, and the small television was definitely not new. I could make things easier for all of you, he said. Better schools for Mercy, a bigger house, opportunities. Money isn't the answer to everything, Aunt Kemi said firmly. That child needs stability and love, not just financial support. She needs to know that the people she depends on won't disappear when life gets complicated. I won't disappear again, Kwame said. But even as he spoke the words, he wondered if he was making another promise he might not be able to keep. The truth was, sitting in this modest Lagos home, he felt more like himself than he had in years. But he also understood that the life he'd built in America couldn't simply be abandoned. He had responsibilities, employees who depended on him, investors who trusted him with their money. There's something else you need to know, Amara said quietly. Mercy's been accepted to a very good school here in Lagos, but the fees are beyond what we can afford. I was hoping that with her medical situation resolved, we could find a way to make it work. I'll pay for the school, Kwame said immediately. I'll pay for everything, her education, housing, whatever she needs. And when she's 18 and wants to visit her father in America? Aunt Kemi asked. When she wants to understand why her daddy lives so far away. When she starts asking questions about why her mother died believing she wasn't worth coming back for. The questions hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. That night, lying in a small guest room that reminded him of his childhood bedroom, Kwame stared at the ceiling and wondered if loving someone meant staying with them or if it meant making sacrifices that allowed them to have better lives. What he didn't know was that his presence in Lagos had already attracted attention from people who remembered him from his youth. People who had their own opinions about men who abandoned families and returned as heroes. Word traveled fast in Lagos. By his 3rd day back, Kwame discovered that his return had become neighborhood news. Some people welcomed him with the respect due to a successful son who had made it in America. Others whispered behind his back about the man who had abandoned a dunny and was only now acknowledging his daughter when it was convenient. The whispers followed him to the local market where he'd gone with Mercy to buy supplies for her art projects. She insisted on holding his hand as they walked, proudly introducing him to vendors as my friend from America who helped fix my heart. Mr. Kwame? An older woman approached them at a fabric stall. She was elegantly dressed despite the market setting, and her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. I am Mrs. Folake Ogundipe. I knew your mother. God rest her soul. Kwame recognized the name immediately. Mrs. Ogundipe had been one of the most influential women in their community when he was growing up, a woman whose opinions could make or break reputations. Mrs. Ogundipe, Kwame replied respectfully. It's good to see you. Is it? She asked, her eyes moving to Mercy, who was absorbed in examining colorful beads. I remember when you left for America. Your mother was so proud. She told everyone her son would return with enough success to help the whole community. I've tried to contribute when I could. From a distance, Mrs. Ogendype interrupted. Very convenient. Contributing from a distance. Tell me, did you also love a dunny from a distance? Did you raise this beautiful child from a distance? Mercy looked up at the sharp tone in the woman's voice. Ma'am, my friend is very nice. He bought me new art supplies and he's going to help me make a big picture for my daddy. Mrs. Ogendype's expression softened slightly when she looked at Mercy, but hardened again when she turned back to Kwame. Children are trusting creatures. They believe in fairy tales and happy endings. The question is whether the adults in their lives deserve that trust. After Mrs. Ogendype walked away, Mercy tugged on Kwame's shirt. Why was that lady angry with you? Sometimes, Kwame said carefully, adults disagree about things that happened a long time ago. Did you do something wrong? The question was asked with such innocent directness that Kwame found himself answering with equal honesty. Yes, I think I did. But you're trying to fix it now, right? I'm trying to figure out how. That evening, Amara found Kwame sitting alone in Aunt Kemi's garden, staring at his phone. He'd been getting calls and messages from Atlanta all day. Business emergencies that needed his attention. Meetings that couldn't be postponed. Decisions that only he could make. You look like a man trying to be in two places at once, Amara observed, settling into the plastic chair beside him. My CFO says we're losing a major contract because I'm not there to handle negotiations personally. My assistant has rescheduled the same meeting 4 times. There's a board meeting next week that I absolutely cannot miss. So you're leaving. I have to go back, at least temporarily. But I want to make arrangements first, for Mercy's school, for ongoing medical care, for anything else she might need. What about what she needs most? Kwame looked at her questioningly. She needs to know who you are, Amara said. She needs to understand why you're really here and why you'll keep coming back. Right now, she thinks you're just a kind stranger. But tomorrow or next week, when other people tell her the truth, how do you think she'll feel about being lied to? I was going to tell her. When? Before you leave for America again? After you've been gone for another month? She's 7 years old, Kwame. Her concept of time is different from yours. A week feels like a year to her. That night, unable to sleep, Kwame walked through the compound and found himself outside Mercy's room. The door was slightly open, and he could see her sleeping peacefully, one of her drawings clutched in her small hand. The drawing showed 2 stick figures labeled Me and Daddy, standing in front of what looked like an airplane. He understood then that she'd been planning for this moment, for meeting her father, probably her entire life. And he was about to break her heart by revealing himself and then leaving again. She draws a new picture every time she misses someone. Aunt Kemi's voice came from behind him. After her mother died, she drew pictures for weeks. After you've been gone for a few days, she'll start drawing pictures of airplanes. I don't know how to do this, Kwame admitted. I don't know how to be a father to someone I just met, especially when my life is 8,000 miles away. Then maybe, Aunt Kemi said gently, you need to decide which life is more important to you. The next morning brought a phone call that would force Kwame to make that decision sooner than he'd planned. Have you ever found yourself torn between 2 worlds, 2 lives that both demand everything you have to give? What would you choose, success and stability, or family and the unknown? Let me know in the comments what you think Kwame should do, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who believes in second chances. The phone call came at dawn, jolting Kwame from restless sleep. His business partner Marcus was calling from Atlanta, his voice tight with urgency. Kwame, you need to get back here immediately. The Shanghai deal is falling apart, and the investors are threatening to pull out of the entire African expansion project. They're saying if you're not committed enough to be here for crucial negotiations, maybe you're not the right person to lead this initiative. Kwame sat up in the small guest bed, his mind racing. The African expansion project wasn't just another business venture. It was his dream of using technology to connect African entrepreneurs with global markets. It represented 5 years of planning and could affect thousands of lives across the continent. "How much time do I have?" he asked. "The meeting is tomorrow at 2 p.m. If you're not in that room, we lose everything. I'm talking about a $150 million project, Kwame. This isn't just about money. It's about proving that African-led companies can compete on the global stage." After hanging up, Kwame sat in the darkness, torn between two impossible choices: stay in Lagos and watch his life's work crumble, or return to Atlanta and break a promise to his daughter before he'd even made it. He found Amara in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the quiet efficiency he'd grown accustomed to in Atlanta. "I have to go back," he said without preamble. Amara's hands stilled on the yams she was peeling. "When?" "Today. There's a flight at noon that gets me to Atlanta with just enough time to save a deal that could change everything for African entrepreneurs." "Including Mercy?" "Especially Mercy. This project would create opportunities for thousands of young Africans. It's bigger than just my business." "And what about the little girl who's been waiting 7 years to meet her father?" Before Kwame could answer, they heard Mercy's voice from the doorway. "Are you leaving?" She stood there in her yellow nightgown, her hair mussed from sleep, holding the drawing she'd made of them together. Her eyes held a wisdom that seemed far too old for 7 years. "I have to go back to America for a few days," Kwame said, kneeling down to her level. "But I'll come back soon." "That's what grown-ups say when they're not coming back," Mercy said quietly. The simple statement hit Kwame like a physical blow. How many times had this child heard promises that were never kept? "Mercy," he said, taking a deep breath, "I need to tell you something important. I'm not just someone who helped pay for your surgery. I'm your father." The drawing fell from Mercy's hands. Her eyes searched his face, looking for truth or lies, hope or disappointment. "You're my daddy?" "Yes." "The one who went to America to build something special?" "Yes, but..." "The one who's been taking care of other children while I was here?" Kwame's throat tightened. The mythology this child had built around his absence was so much better than the truth. "Mercy, I haven't been as good a father as you deserved. I made mistakes, big ones, but I want to try to fix them now." Mercy stepped closer and placed her small hand on his cheek. "Mama used to say that love means you keep trying, even when it's hard." She was right. "So if you're my daddy, and you love me, you'll keep trying?" "Yes. Even if you have to go to America sometimes?" Kwame looked into his daughter's eyes and saw not the judgment he deserved, but the pure, uncomplicated love of a child who had chosen to believe in him despite everything. "Even when I have to go to America sometimes," he promised. 2 hours later, Kwame stood in the compound courtyard with his bags packed, surrounded by 3 generations of women who would become his family. Mercy held his hand tightly, but she wasn't crying. "Will you call me every day?" she asked. "Every single day. Will you tell me about the tall buildings and the snow?" "I'll tell you everything." "Will you come back for my school play next month?" Kwame hesitated. He had no idea what his schedule would look like in a month, what crises might arise, what demands his business would make. "He'll be there," Amara said firmly, looking directly at Kwame. "Won't you?" "I'll be there," Kwame promised, understanding that this was more than just a commitment to attend a school play. This was a promise to choose his daughter over everything else that might compete for his attention. As his taxi pulled away from the compound, Kwame watched through the rear window as Mercy waved from Aunt Kemi's arms. She was smiling, but he could see Amara wiping tears from her own eyes. The flight to Atlanta gave him 18 hours to think about the choice he was making. He wasn't just returning to save a business deal. He was returning to figure out how to build a life that could span 2 continents and honor commitments in both places. But when he landed in Atlanta and saw the familiar skyline, he felt like a different person than the man who had left a week ago. The city looked the same, but he was viewing it through the eyes of a father who had promises to keep. The next morning's board meeting would determine not just the future of his business, but whether he could create the kind of success that would allow him to be the father Mercy deserved. What he didn't expect was that the biggest surprise was waiting for him in his Atlanta office. Kwame arrived at his Atlanta headquarters with 15 minutes to spare before the most important meeting of his career. The gleaming glass building that housed his company felt foreign after a week in Lagos, like putting on clothes that no longer fit properly. His assistant Jennifer rushed to meet him at the elevator. "Thank God you're back. The Shanghai investors are already in the conference room, and they are not happy about the delays. Any word from Marcus on their mood? He says they're ready to walk." Mr. Chun specifically mentioned that if an African company can't maintain consistent leadership presence, they question the viability of expanding into African markets. Kwame straightened his tie and checked his reflection in the elevator's polished walls. He looked like the successful businessman he'd always been, but behind his eyes was the new weight of fatherhood and the knowledge that this meeting wasn't just about his own success anymore. The conference room was tense when he entered. 5 investors sat around the polished table, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Marcus looked relieved but worried. "Gentlemen," Kwame began, "I apologize for the delay in our negotiations. I had to handle a family emergency that required immediate attention." Mr. Chun, the lead investor, leaned forward. "Mr. Asante, we understand that personal matters arise. However, this is a $150 million investment in emerging markets. We need partners who can demonstrate unwavering commitment." "I understand your concerns completely," Kwame replied. "In fact, my recent experience has given me even greater insight into why this African expansion project is crucial." For the next hour, Kwame presented his vision with a passion that surprised even himself. He spoke about the brilliant young entrepreneurs he'd met in Lagos, about the innovative solutions being developed in Nigerian tech hubs, about the untapped potential that waited for the right investment and infrastructure. But more than that, he spoke about legacy, about building systems that would create opportunities for the next generation of African children. He thought about Mercy as he talked, about the world he wanted her to inherit. "This isn't just about profit margins," Kwame said, pulling up a presentation slide that showed projected job creation across 6 African countries. "This is about proving that African-led companies can be global leaders. It's about creating pathways for young Africans to build their own success stories without having to choose between their heritage and their ambitions." The room was quiet for a long moment after he finished. Mr. Chun consulted his notes, then looked up with a slight smile. "Mr. Asante, your passion is evident, and your projections are solid. We're prepared to move forward with the full investment, with one condition. Which is, we want you to establish a permanent presence in Lagos. Not just periodic visits, but a real operational headquarters. If you're going to connect African entrepreneurs with global markets, you need to be embedded in the community you're serving." Kwame felt his heart skip a beat. "You want me to move back to Nigeria? We want you to split your time. 3 months in Atlanta, 3 months in Lagos, alternating throughout the year. It would demonstrate your commitment to both markets and give you the direct oversight this project requires." It was the perfect solution to an impossible problem, handed to him by investors who had no idea they were offering him exactly what he needed to be both a successful businessman and a present father. "Gentlemen," Kwame said, extending his hand to Mr. Chun, "you have a deal." 3 months later, Kwame stood in the audience of a small school in Lagos, watching his daughter perform in her first-grade play. She was dressed as a butterfly, her costume decorated with the same colorful beads he remembered from their first day at the market. When the play ended and Mercy ran to him with her arms outstretched, he lifted her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. "Did you see me fly, Daddy? I saw everything, baby girl. You were perfect." Amara approached with Aunt Kemi, both women beaming with pride. "So," Amara said, "how does it feel to be a father who keeps his promises?" Kwame looked around at the packed school auditorium, at the other parents celebrating their children's achievements, at the community that had welcomed him back despite his past mistakes. "It feels like coming home," he said. That evening, as they walked back to the compound through Lagos streets that hummed with evening activity, Mercy slipped her hand into his. "Daddy, do you know what I wished for when I was in the hospital?" "What did you wish for?" "I wished that someday I would have a daddy who would choose me first, even when other things were important too. Kwame stopped walking and knelt down to look into his daughter's wise eyes. You know what, baby girl? Sometimes wishes come true exactly when they're supposed to. Even when they take a long time? Especially when they take a long time. Those are the wishes that mean the most. As they continued their walk home, Kwame reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A credit card purchase that revealed a secret. A housemaid who turned out to be an angel. A business deal that became the bridge between two worlds. And a little girl whose capacity for forgiveness had taught him that love isn't about perfect timing. It's about showing up, again and again, even when you're afraid. 6 months later, the Lagos Times ran a feature story about the successful African entrepreneur who had returned home to build a business empire that spanned continents. But the headline that meant the most to Kwame was the one Mercy wrote in crayon and taped to his office wall. My daddy keeps his promises. Sometimes the most important purchases we make aren't with money. Sometimes they're made with courage, honesty, and the willingness to admit our mistakes. Kwame's story reminds us that it's never too late to come home, never too late to be the person someone needs us to be, and never too late for love to find a way. What started with a shocking credit card notification ended with a father and daughter walking hand in hand through the streets of Lagos, proving that sometimes the best investments are the ones we make in each other. The billionaire had given 3 women his credit card, but what his maid bought with his money wasn't just a life-saving surgery. It was a second chance at the life he was always meant to live. Thanks for watching.